Hello. Hello, everybody. Welcome here today. Hope you are all enjoying the good weather here and having a good time here. My name is Venkat Krishnamachari. You may call me Venkat when you are just asking questions. That'll be easy. My colleague Sandy Arthur is here. We're going to be talking about the Windows Server software and hardware certification today. We'll be presenting some details about what's new in the certification programs and how to participate in the program and how you can get your products differentiated in the marketplace when we finally list them in the marketplace. The overall agenda here, so who's going to be benefiting from this talk? Server application, device, and system vendors that wish to participate in the software and hardware logo program are our primary audience today that we are hoping you'll get some benefit out of this. And this is for the new generation of Windows Server, internally codenamed Windows Server 8. The topics that we're going to talk about is into twofold. First is the software certification program, then the hardware certification program. In software, we'll be covering a basic overview of the program, technical requirements, what's new in the Windows Server 8 timeframe, and when the toolkit is going to be available, and more importantly, how to participate in the program and the overall timeline. In hardware, there'll be a detailed overview, and then more information about how to qualify your devices, your systems, and more information on the unclassified program. And there's also going to be a question and answer time towards the end. We ask that you reserve the question and answers till about 15 minutes into the presentation. Sandy and I will be here to answer your questions. And we're hoping you're going to leave with a clear understanding of what are the new technical requirements in software and hardware programs and how you can basically participate. So at the highest level, this is a mission slide for the certification programs, right? The overall mission of the certification program is to improve customer satisfaction, by which we mean our mutual customers. We are thankful so far for the participation we have received from the ISV and IHV community. Together, we have worked hard on the logo programs, got our products validated, gave a great experience for our customers, and we want to continue that tradition. We want to take it up one notch, and we want to improve more of the customers, and we want to get more satisfaction. That's the overall mission, followed by the vendor product exposure. We want to be able to differentiate quality products, certified products, from non-certified products. We want to put a spotlight on the good work that you do with your products, and certification is a means for us to do that in the marketplace. The third is basically we want to provide a more streamlined experience. We've been getting feedback from you. We've been internalizing that feedback. We've been making process changes, toolkit changes, overall changes with our participation mechanisms. So you will see that our mission is also to provide more streamlined certification process for Windows Server 8. And we're also going to talk about some specific customer needs that are getting addressed by the certification programs. Number one being compatibility. So with the certification programs, you'll see a lot of requirements that drive for greater compatibility so products just work right out of the box. And that's one of the customer-specific needs we'll be driving through the programs. We'll also be driving technical requirements around reliability, availability, and manageability. You'll see more specifics as we go forward into this presentation. Right now, I'm going to do a deep dive into the software presentation. This is all about how to get your server applications certified for the Windows Server 8 timeframe. So on that note, I would like to add what we've been always recommending. This software certification requirements, toolkits, and the program itself is not just for commercial software. We have heard great things from our IT pros, from our customers, that they've been able to take these requirements, apply it to their line of business applications, apply it to their homegrown solutions, and be able to improve their experience of their internal customers also. So these apps may not yet be listed in the marketplace, but they can certainly benefit by using the requirements, using the toolkit, and overall your internal customers are also going to be happy. So we encourage any internal apps that you might have in your own organizations to also be validated through these programs, and that's what we'll be strongly encouraging our customers and our IT pros to do. So if you're surprised by a customer who comes and says, we run this toolkit on your beta version, that's expected. We are making these toolkits also available to customers so they can run the solution to see whether the beta product that they're going to make a decision on is compatible or not. So onward to software details. This is about the evolution of the certification program for Windows Server 8. Those of you who are familiar with the program, we have had two levels of program. One is the Works With certification program. That's like a foundation level certification. Helps application to be validated against a compatibility bar and some basic security requirements. On top of that, we built a certification program, which is the Certified for Windows Server. That had a lot more details in it. The building on top of Works is, of course, security, more high reliability and availability requirements. We've been experimenting with some of this, and we've been getting a lot of feedback, more constructive and also positive feedback, which has led us to evolve these programs into a single program. So those of you who are familiar with the certified program, it can take about 4 to 5 days to run the tests, and it's a third-party certification vendor process, and it used to cost around like $8,000 to do the certification testing. We're changing all of that. We're taking some of the goodness we learned from the Works With program, which was a self-test, free test, and we're applying that to the certified technical bar. So the result is we're going to have a level of program, a single level of program for Windows Server 8 for software. So if you're looking to certify your software solution, it is going to be a free self-test program, by the way. There is no third-party testing vendor requirement. We are basically dropping that angle, and we're making these tools more intelligent to be able to cover greater depth. So the certified program or the new program for Windows Server 8 is going to just require a self-validation using a toolkit that Microsoft's going to make available. And the toolkit will also have optional recommendations, best practices that are part of some of the high quality bar we have in certified program. So you can also benefit from looking at what the toolkit suggests as stuff that can be fixed. It may not be required, but is recommended. So toolkit is going to include both required and recommended practices. We call the toolkit the Windows Server App Validation Kit, and that's going to be available later in the release process. But it's going to be aimed both at retail applications and, like I said, line of business applications. And the toolkit is designed to be more highly deterministic. So you run the toolkit once, it should be able to come back and give you technical results that are actionable to your development team, so they can go fix certain areas of your application. So we encourage that the toolkit is incorporated in your regular test cycles, in your quality internal milestones. That way you get greater value out of it. The third big piece here we are changing, or we are adapting, so to speak, is we are basically moving our certification programs, the software certification programs delivery mechanism, so to speak, into the Microsoft Platform Ready program. Those of you who are familiar with the partner program at Microsoft, if you go to the Microsoft Partner Network, so you get a lot of competency benefits. As part of the competency benefits, as part of the MPN, Microsoft Partner Network portal, there is a program called Microsoft Platform Ready. So we're going to be rolling out the software certification program through that portal. So all successful applications that pass the certification requirements will be listed in a catalog that's a customer-facing catalog that will be powered by the Microsoft Pinpoint. And we are still determining the details of what the marketplace is going to look like, but it is our plan. It is our plan to go get the certified apps spotlighted and highlighted in a customer-facing marketplace. So if you also play around with the latest Windows Server bits, you will find that there's a new Server Manager link. Right in box in the Server Manager link, there is a link to the marketplace. So we want to maximize certified, the exposure for the certified products. So every server installation is going to have a link to the marketplace that will take customers there, and we'll be highlighting both hardware and software solutions that have been certified. That's another way we're going to, bring more exposure. This slide outlines the policies and prerequisites. Mind you, all of this applies to the software solutions. So As you can see, some of the requirements and policies have been carried forward from the R2 logo program, the Windows Server R2 logo program, to here. The basic requirements still remain, which is you have to test on a virtual machine on Microsoft Hyper-V, and all drivers must be signed by the Windows logo program. And the enterprise best practices needs to be followed during all times of your application life cycle, by which we mean from the installation phase to primary functionality, to configuration, to uninstallation. Basically, the life cycle of the application needs to follow these best practices in the server environment. Most of this is pretty much carried forward from the last release. One line item there, the default security policy. We moved from the security configuration wizard to the security compliance manager tool. So the server needs to be, in the olden term, hardened using the security compliance manager tool before your app can be tested. So that will be a requirement that the tool is going to enforce. This is the slide that kind of talks in a detailed way about what are the new and existing technical requirements that form part of the Windows Server 8 certification program. At the highest level, compatibility, right? So the application must install without any compatibility issues, and it must comply with the Windows installer if your installation package uses MSI or any other Windows installer mechanisms. It must comply with a set of additional best practices. And the setup must allow admin control of install locations. That's becoming a little bit more serious requirement, particularly when we have more data disks. We have scenarios where we have VHDs that are designated data drives. So we want to be able to test the application by installing it not on the default partition, but on a designated drive that the admins want to be able to test, which also can help in a scenario where your application must be tested with a non-shell scenario, right? So you will be, there's another session that's happening right now. We'll point to you after this session, which you can go get the video and content of it. Basically, in Windows Server 8, our push is to have no GUI on the server. The default installation is server core installation. We are recommending to customers that they install the server in a server core flavor and manage the server remotely using client tools, which means server applications need to be not reliant on the GUI features. There's a long list of DLLs and basically features that we will line out. Your applications should not take any dependency on that. And applications must be able to install with the scenario where it's server core. And it's also scenarios where if a full server gets rolled back to server core scenario, which is possible in Server 8, your applications must continue to work. That is another feature that we're going to require. And the last one on the first area, which is the installation must not require a reboot. We have heard time and again from our customers that reboot is the #1 pain point. So we'll continue to enforce this requirement, which is your application installation or uninstallation must not require a reboot. If it has to require a reboot, it should be postponable by the administrators at minimum. So that's a line item requirement we have there. The next area is primary functionality. Again, there are these tools that we're releasing will be testing the application through the primary functionality of the application. So the tools are going to be monitoring the background, and it's going to look for any crashes, any event logs, any such compatibility issues, and start reporting that. So your test pass would need to include that there are no flags that are being called out by the tool during the course of primary functionality. Also, if there are client components, that has to be concurrently tested on a Windows client mission, which is a remote mission, and the management needs to be tested concurrently. That's going to be a requirement. The last section is the uninstallation. Again, no compatibility issues. The standard requirements are: do not leave files behind, do not disrupt services that don't belong to your application, and basically, if there are reboot requirements, again, allow the administrator to postpone the reboot. It should not be a reboot that's mandated. So that's the list of 3 buckets, basically: installation, primary functionality, and uninstallation. Those are the requirements and line item details. We do have a 0.9 draft spec, the technical requirement spec that's available today. It's part of the resources links here. When you get your slides using your build content, it points to the draft spec. We encourage you to download the spec. A lot more details about these line items are in the spec. And we are going to look for some more feedback before we jump to the 1.0 draft, or 1.0 release version of the spec towards the end of the year. So if you have feedback between this time and till we jump to 1.0, it's a great time to give us feedback. So more technical requirements are in the document. Go get that. As for the timeline, the build, as of build, we have the technical requirements document, and we are looking to release the toolkit around basically the beta timeframe. And we'll also release some beta versions of our toolkit prior to that. Look for that, and if you have any feedback, try to use the toolkit. Reach out to us. We are happy to hear from you always. The program is going to go live per our current plans along with the release candidate of Windows Server. The idea here is, as of release candidate, if you're able to get to work with you and get your applications to certify, we can highlight those applications at launch. Gives us a lot more ability to put spotlights on the early adopters of the program, and also gives our customers more certified solutions right from the day one of launch, so they can upgrade. So those are the timelines for Server 8 software certification program, and the link below will get you the technical requirements draft. With that, we're jumping into hardware. I'm going to invite my colleague Sandy Arthur. He's going to be taking you through the in-depth features of software logo program. Thanks.
Thanks, Venkat. That was great. I'm Sandy Arthur. For those of you who don't know me, I'm in the Windows Server org, and I'm responsible for all things related to the server logo, so the requirements and the tests, and working with the Windows certification kit team to make sure that that all works together, and we can deliver a product to you so that you can run those tests and you can have your product put up on the catalog so that customers can see it. I love this job, and the reason is I get to have an impact on basically every server customer, right? So there's millions of server customers, and of course those servers are all connected to hundreds of millions and approaching 1 billion client systems, those that are networked. So I feel like we have a possibility of really impacting all those customers and doing great things for them, right? And so it's the software and the hardware together that deliver that great experience. One scheduling note, just so happens by the vagaries of random chance that we are giving a presentation on logo or certification first. So that we're the very first folks, even though perhaps that's not the best organization or scheduling that could have been. But we'll be mentioning at the end a whole bunch of resources for other presentations that you can go to and take a look at so that you can get more information, get more in-depth knowledge about the actual kit and the processes that go into it, because I'm not really going to spend a lot of time on that here today. So, quick overview. The way that the Windows Server certification works is that we leverage what the client organization does, right? So all those things that are being done for desktops and laptops and tablets, we're using a lot of that functionality. We're taking part in the actual processes that get the requirements out. We're working with the teams that deliver the tests. We're working with the team that delivers the kit. That site where you submit your products when it's time for them to become certified, we're also working with them, and all those other processes and things that all pull this together. We're using that infrastructure so that we can make it as easy as possible, because many of you deliver products for both client and server, right? So if you have adapters that you're selling, you may be selling them into both the client and server market, and certainly many, many OEMs have both client and server products, and they don't want to have a whole bunch of different sorts of processes and procedures that they have to go through. Now, with that said, we do make modifications. We make modifications to the requirements. We make modifications to the tests. We make modifications to the procedures so that we're achieving the goal of taking care of the end-using customer, that server customer that we both have. And then finally, there's sometimes some confusion on what is the schedule for Windows Server 8 or for any of the versions, right? Historically, it's been a a client release, a server release, a client release, a server release. It's not true for this release. We're on exactly the same schedule as the client. So when we're here at build, when there's a beta, we'll be there for the beta. When there's a release candidate, that's when we will have our release candidate and all the milestones there that line up for the requirements and the tests and the kits and when you can submit. All those will be the same between client and server. Okay, let me talk briefly about kind of the philosophy of what we do. And I talked about how we do make modifications and we do change things. The first thing is that any server device that's certified for server has to be able to work in any server system. Now, that's a pretty diverse kind of category to say things have to work, right? We have one processor servers with 8 or 16 gigabytes of memory and one hard drive and one NIC, et cetera, rather small system. We also have systems that have multiple terabytes of memory, tens of processors, tens or even hundreds of PCI slots, right? So you can tell there's a great deal of difference between those systems. As an example, we have a need for every single device and driver that works in server to work in a multiple processor group system. Any system that has more than 64 logical processors has to have multiple processor groups. Consequently, we have a requirement that all devices and drivers have to work in that environment. Just as Venkat mentioned earlier, where we have a need for products to work at the software level in a non-GUI environment, right, where the customer is running server core, we have the same sort of requirement for the device drivers and any configuration that they can do. So all your device drivers, if they can be configured, right, typically in the old GUI days, that would have been done through device control panel kind of applets or something direct, or heaven forbid, registry modifications. That's not something that we can use going forward. For server systems, the focus of the requirements and the tests and the processes is all around reliability, availability, serviceability. We want to make sure that the server scenarios that customers have are being serviced correctly, right? So we're taking care of them, we're providing them with something that is meaningful, right? So we're concentrated on RAS, and in many cases you'll see that we don't have requirements that the client organization does for their desktops, laptops, and tablets. And we'll get to some more examples of that later. So let's talk about those devices. So the first thing I want to say is there's about 1,000 requirements. And some of the requirements are pages long. So it's a big document, right? If you download everything and you bound it all up, I'm certain it would, be inches tall. So there are a lot of them. You need to read the logo requirements closely and make sure that you're paying attention to the applicable OS version section and that you're looking for any sorts of exemptions or if implemented or system may or device may kind of language that's in there so that you know what is relevant to your particular product, right? And I'm going to reiterate that later. So let me give you an example of a requirement that doesn't apply. Since Windows Server 2008, we have not actually had the code for Bluetooth in server, right? So there's obviously no need to have any Bluetooth requirements around that for server. So we don't. Simply isn't there. However, conversely, we do have requirements that apply to both client and server, and I wanted to put this in front of you because this is kind of an important one for a device, in Xpool. So we now have a special pool in the operating system for non-executable code, and the intent here is to provide better protection against overflow attacks, right? So that's something that when your software development team is writing code, right, a device driver, they don't have to make a distinction between, oh, it's going to install on server or it's going to install on client. Doesn't matter. It's all the same. This goes back to the fact that we're looking at making sure that the reliability, the availability, serviceability, et cetera, for server products is as high as we can make them. Now, specific to the server for device requirements are some things that we looked at here. And I'm going to, before I talk about prefast for drivers or static driver verifier, I want to talk a little bit about the process that we went through in coming to a decision to do this. So the goal, the direction that I have been given is to increase the RAS, right? So increase the reliability and availability of server systems, okay? So what is it that I need to do? Well, one of the things that I need to do is improve the quality of device drivers that go into server systems. So we looked at what can we do in that area? How can we do that? So for those of you who've been around for a long time, we had in Windows 2000 a data center program. And we required that any vendor who wanted to have a data center driver program qualified device had to run the test for 14 days. Okay, so that was useful. It accomplished its goal at the time, but over time we've improved our testing, and so we no longer have that. But it's an option. One way we could improve the quality and the reliability is to make you test much, much longer. Okay, so that's one. Two, we could write a whole bunch of tests and say, okay, instead of running one set of tests for a really long time, we're going to have a whole bunch of tests, but they run a really long time. Okay? Now, both these options have negative consequences, right? If you have a whole bunch of tests that you have to run, you're going to end up having more systems, more power, more space, more cooling, more personnel, right? And let's say that the test was 14 days long. You got to the 13th day. Something failed. You now have just burned up 13 days. And so if you were making any plans based upon, I'm going to complete certification on day X, and I'll submit on day Y, and on day Z, I'm going to be able to sell that product, guess what? You're now delayed by 13 days, right? So both of those options are kind of risky for you and can cost you real money. So what can we do to improve reliability? So we looked at the online crash analysis information that comes into Microsoft, right? So we get reams of information every day from customers. It all comes into our online crash analysis site, and we get to analyze that, and we look and we see what are the crashes that are happening, right, that affect network devices, storage devices, and kind of anything else. And we can tell, oh, look, we have a whole bunch of stops here about power state transitions. So what do we need to do? Well, we could write more tests. But instead, we looked at why is it that the devices and drivers that are kept in the box, right? They're the in-box drivers for Windows Server and client. Why do those seem to be more reliable than those that are just logoed? So we analyzed that, and we found that, well, sure, they get run a lot, so there's kind of the we tested a lot scenario, but that's not economically practical for you, right? I can't say, oh, well, we ran your code for 9 months, and we want you to do the same before you logo. That doesn't make any sense. No one would put up with it. But another thing that we discovered was that all of those drivers have been analyzed with prefast for drivers and static driver verifier. So we then looked at what are the things that static driver verifier, SDV, and prefast for driver, PFD, can find in your code that would compare to the crashes that we see coming in from the field. And we found that there was a large amount of overlap, right? I won't say it's 100%. It's not. There's always going to be other things. But there's a significant benefit to running SDV and PFD on your device drivers. So That's the rationale for how we got to, we're going to make these a requirement for server devices, specifically network devices, storage devices, and I'm going to use quotes here, unclassified devices. And we'll talk about unclassified later. Briefly, Prefaster Drivers, PFD, is a tool that looks basically at the procedural layout of the code. Is every if followed by a then, right? Are all your variables initialized? And so the idea here is that we're cleaning up some of the common kind of problems and failures of coding that happen, right? They're really easy to miss, and if it's not something that gets caught in testing because you didn't cover that particular case, then it's out in the field, and eventually when it's used on millions of systems, it will get tripped over. Customers will find the problem, and then it'll end up on your support desk, and you'll have to fix it, and that'll cost you money. So PFD, this tool, allows you to not have that problem, and it saves you from having to go out and spend a lot of money on more devices, more systems, more personnel, space, power, cooling, etc. So for a little bit of extra time done during development time, you save a lot on testing and a lot on your support and sustainment costs later on. Now, Static Driver Verifier is a slightly different tool, complementary. SDV, the way it works is it builds a model of your device driver and memory, and then it executes all the code paths. And it's very good for finding kind of interprocedural sorts of issues, right? So something that can happen, there's some module of code over here, it makes a call to here, this piece doesn't react correctly. That's the kinds of errors that it can find. SDV also has rules that are specific to networking devices or storage devices or USB devices, etc. And so if your code is doing something that violates those rules, then that gets found and we can tell you that. So these are two software tools that we're going to be requiring that get used for Windows Server 8 device submissions, okay? And we think that will save you a great deal of money long term in the use of them. And these tools, if you want to start seeing how they work today, well, they've been in since Vista. They were in the Windows development kits for Vista 2008, Win 7 2008 R2, right? So the tools are already available. Now, that said, these tools are much improved. So take a look at them, start using them, and then you'll be one up when you get ready to do it for Windows Server 8. So back to the reliability. Advanced error reporting is part of the specification for PCI Express. So I went and I asked a bunch of IXVs, IHVs, and I said, does your product support advanced error reporting, AER? And they all assured me that since they complied with the specification for PCI Express, that of course they supported AER. That being the case, we decided to make this a requirement. Now, what does that give us? Going back to the idea of improving RAS, AER is an error source for Windows hardware error correction, or error architecture, excuse me. So AER can feed HUIA. HUIA fills up the event log and says, oh, by the way, there was a physical hardware event that occurred in an adapter, and that can probably be correlated to some sort of crash or some other problem that happened, right? So now, when your IT pro or your support or service personnel are in the field, right, or someone is on the phone back at the office, you can say, is there an event in the event log related to this particular adapter? And that can be looked for. And if there is, then you know what you need to do. This is much preferable than having someone go out with a truck full of components and saying, well, it might have been the HBA, so let's pull the HBA out and put another one in. Is it the same version? Is it the same BIOS? Does it use the same driver? Has it been configured the same way? How many times you're going to have to reboot the server to make sure that's all true? And you may have BSD'd, static discharged, the system or the adapter on the way, so you may have killed everything. So that's not a good solution. AER is how you can reduce that, and that will reduce your cost. It will reduce your cost even if you're an IHV that has nobody calling you about your particular component. And the way it'll do that is you'll get fewer RMAs, return to manufacturers, right? Instead of just blindly sending back some adapter saying, well, it just doesn't work, now you'll be able to know that it does or it doesn't, right? Based upon my conversations with IHVs, they tell me that about anywhere from 1/3 to 1/2 of all the adapters they get back work just fine. So it was something else, right? This will save that problem. Finally, remember I was talking about those really large computers with lots of slots in them, lots of processors and lots of logical processors. If you have some sort of device, network device, storage device, whatever it is, and you've got multiple functions in that device and you decide to set aside one interrupt per function, per core, per processor, then very quickly you're going to run out of the IDT, right? The interrupt dispatch table will become exhausted, or the memory in the system will become exhausted. Either way, someone will put in an adapter, install the driver, the system will either pop immediately with an error 10 or an error 12 or at the next reboot, and all of a sudden the device doesn't work or some other device doesn't work. Now what do you do? Well, to avoid that, we're going to have a requirement that says do not use greater than this number, right? 2,048 interrupts per device, okay? This should not be a great burden, but believe it or not, we actually ran into this already, which is why we had this requirement. Right? So let's make sure we don't have this problem. All right, that was about devices. And again, I just gave examples. There are a lot of individual requirements that you need to look at in your specific areas. So let me reiterate, please read all the requirements closely. Make sure that you look at what are the applicable OS versions. Make sure that you look for any sort of exemptions or if implemented kind of language. So in line with what we did for devices, let me talk about a requirement that doesn't apply to server. So for client, there's a UEFI requirement that talks about the post time. That makes perfect sense for a small system with 1 or 2 processors and not a great deal of memory. Great. The requirement actually talks about if you have ECC memory, this doesn't apply. There are not many workstations or laptops or desktops that have that. A few, perhaps. But all server systems have ECC. They also have lots of memory and lots of other physical resources. And just walking through all of those and initializing them takes more time than could possibly be justified. And, you know, where do we set the number? Well, it has to be done in 10 seconds, 20, 30, a minute, 5 minutes? How long? So it just makes more sense to say we're not going to have this requirement. So we don't, right? So there's no UEFI post time requirement for server systems. Conversely, a requirement that applies to both client and server, and when I say this, let me give a proviso. It's not really required that a server have video, right? There's no requirement for graphics. But if it does, that graphics device has to work with the Microsoft Basic Display Driver. And there are other presentations that talk about this, and you can get that information from Akshay and all those folks. But this is one of those places where it's exactly the same requirement. So again, make sure you read those requirements closely. Moving on to the server-specific requirements, we had kind of a goal that any system that was logo qualified, and I'm using that specific word, logo qualified, for Windows Server 2008 R2 should be able to get certified for Windows Server 8, right? That was our goal. Pursuant to that goal, we made as few changes as we possibly could at the system level with regard to, the hardware, the BIOS, the firmware, how things work, etc. Mostly, the changes have to do with the devices and drivers that fit into the system. However, there are a few small things. Here are a couple of them. There aren't many. I pulled out two that are kind of unusual. The first one is the Windows Display Driver model. Now, historically, Windows 2000, 2003, 8, R2 have used a very antiquated kind of device driver model for video. So that's been used forever. So I think some of the chips that are being used in servers were delivered 15 years ago, and they haven't changed since. That's great. But the device driver that goes with them from those previous times is not going to work. So if an XDDM device driver is there, the OS will not use it, right? We just won't recognize it. It just won't function. And so that system will have no video, right? Which will be a little annoying if it's an SMB system for a customer who's trying to see what's on the screen. You have to use the Windows Display Driver model. Or you can use, thinking back a couple of slides ago, the Microsoft Basic Display Driver, which we are deliberately testing against some of these devices to make sure that it works, right? So it's not necessarily the case that you'll have to write your own driver, especially if you don't need any special functionality. The other thing that we have is a critical functionality retest policy. Now, this isn't really a requirement on the hardware, nor is it a requirement on device drivers. It's a requirement that has to do with the fact that there's always technological change in the industry. So over time, we've seen new technologies come like Fiber Channel over Ethernet, so on and so forth, X2 APIC. Lots of different technologies come to the fore. Perhaps the previous operating system was not really designed for it. The vendor that was designing the new feature, the new technology, didn't take into account all the possible cases. We find out then that either there's changes required to the operating system or device drivers or firmware or something else to prevent data loss, right? That's the worst case. If that's the case, we're going to require that the server system be retested with the device drivers that may have needed to be changed to take into account these kinds of problems, right? Now, are we going to do this every time some new technology comes along? No. Are we going to make everybody retest if it's just a matter of, some particular function doesn't work, like, I don't know, UEFI runtime, right, which is not usually super important for systems? No, we're not going to require that. But if there is a data loss issue, right, data loss, data corruption, we will be coming to the vendors and saying, you're going to have to retest your product with the new code, right? Either your new code or our new code or new code in the firmware somewhere to fix this issue, okay? Finally, server systems have a number of if-implemented kinds of features. Everything's kind of if-implemented for server, but that's the way the test kit is actually designed. But these are some that are a little bit more specific and a little more important to customers. So UEFI is one of those if-implemented kinds of features. It's not a requirement for server. It is for client. But if it is a server with UEFI, it has to meet all the requirements. It has to pass all the tests. Now, this is important because I think, in fact, we mentioned a couple of places already in the presentations and keynotes that there are, 3 terabyte hard drives that are available. If you have a boot device that's greater than 2.2 terabytes, The only way to support it is with UEFI, right? So becomes more important. Another one that's important to customers because, well, just think of all the things that have happened lately with WikiLeaks or insurance companies or credit card companies and all the attacks and hacks and crack-ins and that have happened. TPM, Trusted Platform Modules, right? So we put a considerable amount of technology into server to take advantage of TPM, right? So that clustering works, but also just secure boot, BitLocker, et cetera. Security is very important to customers. We're saying you don't have to put it in, but if you do put it in, it has to meet the minimum requirement and it has to pass all the tests. The same is true for power manageability. This is the number one most important additional qualifier that we talk about for Windows Server 2008 R2. We've already got something like 150 servers, probably 1/3 of all the servers that have been submitted in the last year or so have this additional qualification. And so we want to make sure that if you implement it, you do it correctly. Now, we actually have increased the requirements in this case. We now say that you have to be able to get and set the ACPI information about power, budget, and metering. Okay? So we're starting to get shy on time, and I'm going to rush through unclassified here. We have had a problem for about the last 10 years about unclassified. We had defined categories for devices. If you didn't fit in that, you just use the unclassified program. That's great, but it only tested a few things. Basically, install, uninstall, and a few other things, whether you were complied with the PCI Express or PCI standard, and that was about it. We ended up with relatively low quality when we signed those drivers. We don't like to have low quality when we sign drivers. What are we doing to fix it? The first thing is, one set of device drivers that were being used were antivirus, anti-malware, et cetera. There's now a full category for that, the filter category. Everything that used to use unclassified can now use that. So a whole bunch of things are taken right off the table. That's good. The next item, the improved test methodology. Basically, we look at every feature that's in the device, and if we see it, we test it. So that means that we're doing more than just install, uninstall PCI Express, and we're done. If we see it, we'll test it. Finally, we've got the tools like SDV and PFD, and they can find further and additional issues and improve the code quality. So we'll be finally making those unclassified devices and drivers visible on whatever we end up using to display the products. Previously, we didn't. We will going forward. Okay, wrapping up. Venkat, you want to come on up here? And we got like a minute and a half before we start taking questions. I don't want to take all the time.
All right, thank you, Sandy.
Yep.
All right, in summary, on the software side, the program has been simplified. It's a unified single logo program, no longer a third-party test vendor. You can go to the website, download the test tool, run the test, upload test results back to Microsoft, and if you sign the license agreement, you're going to get the sticker, if you will, right? So then the app is now certified, and the app will be automatically listed in the server marketplace. So we also recommend that the apps, line of business apps, are also tested with these toolkits, but they can't get certified. That's the big summary on software. On hardware, do you want to do the summary, Sandy?
Yeah, very quickly, right? It's all about RAS, improve that reliability, availability, and serviceability. And we worked very, very hard to reduce your test costs, right? So your development cost should be reduced. Your test costs should be reduced. Hopefully your support costs will be reduced. We'll be improving the reliability of unclassified, which will help the customer out. And we want to make sure that we're exposing all of these products in a way that customers know, yep, these are the things that I should buy. And I shouldn't buy some clone white box, right, that someone swears it would pass the tests if I ran them. But it's not really important, you know. right? So,
That's good. We have 10 minutes, but it's the last slide that talks about call to action. So the big call to action on the software server side is go download the certification requirements, give us feedback, look at the new requirements. The toolkit is not yet available, but when it's available, first thing, give it a shot. And use these tools in the development and basically development environments, and take your certification kits to improve your overall quality of the product. You may or may not choose to certify certain products depending on your business needs, but still we recommend that you take these tools and take these best practices, give it to your development teams, and get the benefit out of it. And in terms of planning, like Sandy mentioned, the timeline is super important. If you're planning to certify on a particular date and go to market on a particular date, unless all the homework is done, it's a risk. So we ask that you plan ahead in time for the certification, run these tools internally, so get confidence that when you submit, you're going to pass. So do all the homework ahead in time so we can meet the customer need for quality, and we can also differentiate your products in the marketplace with greater confidence. There are some related sessions, like Sandy mentioned. The ordering of the sessions have been interesting. So there is this overall introduction to the certification program. There's also like a detailed program about the hardware certification kit. The session numbers are listed. We recommend that you catch up with these sessions online when the material becomes available to you. Or if one of these sessions is happening at a later time, please go get some value out of that. Here's the list of sessions again. I'm not probably going to walk through each of this line item here, but this is part of the slide deck and the content that you get. So these are the recommended sessions and related sessions we are wanting to bring to your attention. Resources. Software, the technical draft is available in that link. And give us some feedback. There is a mailbox that my team, myself, we are all in the mailbox. If you have any recommendations, any important clarifications, this is a great time to give us those kind of questions. Send us your questions. I promise we'll get back to you as soon as we can.
On the hardware, let me jump in there.
Yeah.
There's too many to list, right? There's too much information that'll be going up on the website. So just look under these areas for the information that you want to see about SDV, PFD, storage, networking, server, etc., the certification program, the kit. All that'll be posted in the future, and we'll get that information out, and you should just keep looking.
Cool. Thanks.
So
Q&A.
What questions do you have? And excuse me, or excuse Venkat and I really can't see very well because of all the lights. So hold up your hand or wave a flag or something. In the back, sir.
In the past, when we've gone through the program, we have, because of the unusual nature of our hardware, we have obtained a couple of waivers in the process. Is that still something that's achievable under the new program?
So my understanding is that there will be the possibility of errata and contingencies for the new kit, right? We understand that sometimes the tests we write are not always correct. Sometimes the OS we write is not always correct. Sometimes it's your problem, right? But we understand we're not perfect, and so the possibility for errata and contingencies does still exist, okay? If there's a problem with that, loop me in. sandyar@microsoft.com. Other questions? Gosh. You mean the sessions, or?
Yeah, sure. We'll leave this on.
Oh, sure. We'll leave that up. Any other questions? No, actually, we're not going to have supported. If you got a logo for 2008 R2, you should be able to get a logo for Windows Server 8. I don't see any need for a supported program, honestly, right? The reason that we had a supported program before is we knew that there were systems that needed significant firmware changes, right, moving forward to meet the new logo requirements. That should not be the case this time. So there's no supported program for servers planned for Windows Server 8. Good question, though.
Cool.
Okay, well, if you have further questions, you know where I live. Other questions?
So, there's a question here. So the question is, does Microsoft help in any way to help ISVs and IHVs to get through these programs, right? You want to jump in on the hardware side?
Yeah, I can't answer for the software side, but for the hardware side, obviously we do publish the requirements. The vast majority of those requirements are based upon industry standards and specifications. We have experts internally, so if you've got some questions or if there's an issue where, you know, here it says option A or option B and we took B and apparently you think A is the only option, then we can have those conversations. So it is possible to get some guidance, but in the sense of can we help you run the tests or debug your hardware or something like that, really the answer is no, okay? I know that's not a great answer, but we have for both client and server approximately 10,000 vendors involved in the hardware program, and it would be physically impossible for Microsoft to, you know, dispatch an engineer to every one of them, right? So if there's issues that come up, ask the questions, right? It may be that we just say, hey, the specification says it has to be that way, right? But if there's some other kind of issue, let's start the conversation.
Cool.
Okay?
Cool.
And there are white papers that we publish, right? So there's, you know, how to do this and how to do that and so on and so forth, right? As an example, right, we talked about device drivers that have to meet greater than 64 processors, work in multiple processor groups. We have a white paper on how that can be done, right? This is how you write a device driver to work in an environment that has multiple processor groups, okay?
Right. Well, add to that on the software side, you know, most of the suppliers, yes, Microsoft does not do one-on-one, you know, run through with our ISVs, but there's going to be some resources on the MSDN, you know, portal. There's going to be a MSDN discussion forum that we'll set up, where we will be actively responding to questions, and we also have seen ISVs actively responding to each of those questions. So those sort of resources will continue to become available. And when we are moving towards the, you know, release candidate, there are going to be programs where we can, you know, selectively work with ISVs who reach out to us seeking help to work with their applications and see where compatibility issues can be avoided. We can also line up some subject matter experts internally where we can be the, you know, the liaison team to find out why a certain, you know, choice you made on a feature or design is not actually meeting a certification requirement. We'll be able to run that by our subject matter experts and come back and find a way to get you through certifications. But we won't scale to the worldwide ISV network, but we can, if it's channeled through the mailbox that we set up, through the MSDN forum that we set up, we will definitely try to get to your, you know, questions.
Another question?
Yeah, you said that the tools for client will be shared on the server, right? The test tools?
The test, yeah.
The client software right now, the server will need to be back in.
Are you talking about hardware or software?
Oh, good question. So on the server, there are some changes in the certification kits. The Windows hardware kit and the software for the client kit, they are in a single kit now. They're in a single kit for the client software and some of the hardware kits. On the server software side, we have a separate toolkit that'll be linked from the Windows certification kit, but it's a separate toolkit. We have a different execution mechanism for the server software side, so it's going to be a different toolkit. So on the server side, you won't be required to set up the controllers and all other, you know, goodness that comes along with the Windows certification kit. It's a self-test and a simple test that we want to be downloadable.
Self-test software kit right now is the same kit as that. So currently there's a software logo kit.
Right.
Is it the same kit you're using for server?
So the question is, there's currently a software logo kit for server. Is it going to be a new kit? It potentially is going to be a new kit. We're going to have some of the automation that's going to get ported over. We're also figuring this out as you guys are figuring it out. For example, one of the line item requirements is that your application does not require a dependency on GUI. The current kit for us is already having a lot of dependency on the GUI. So we're going to probably adjust our toolkit also to work in that scenarios. So it's going to be a new kit, but we'll have the elements of the current toolkit because a lot of the requirements are getting ported over to the Windows Server 8 software certification. Cool.
So we're actually over time, but as long as they don't throw us out, I'm certain Venkat and I will continue to take questions. Are there any further? Yes? No? I'll stand up here until people drag me off the stage. No?
Right.
Then I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you for
Hopefully
coming.
It was educational.
Yeah.